The opinions and statements expressed in the following program do not necessarily reflect those of WWDB, its staff, or management.
All right, ladies and gentlemen around the Delaware Valley, welcome to the Jeff Grove Show on WWDB 860 AM, Who's Who in Philly Labor Radio Network, sponsored by Weineman Pain and Wellness Serious Doctors. For serious injuries, we have an outstanding show for the Delaware Valley listeners today. We have two heavyweight attorneys, Jeff Gross and Martin Rubenstein of Levy Baldante Finney and Rubenstein. Jeff, how are you today, sir?
Hey, Joe, how are you? All good, all good. How about you?
Well, I'm doing good. I mean, I think we're all used to working remotely these days, and certainly, like we've said several times, very uncertain times. But I think it's important for us to provide information and really give the listeners, answers to their questions. If you would, introduce your guest.
So with me today is Marty Rubenstein. He is a phenomenal seasoned trial attorney handling personal injury claims, and he does a great job with handling those claims. He's with Levy Baldante Finney and Rubenstein. Marty, say hello.
Good afternoon, everyone. Jeff, thank you. It's great to be with you. Great to be with Joe. It's an honor, and it's incredible times that all of us are living in right now. But I think as long as we're all surrounded by family and able to follow the advice we're getting, we'll get through this.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Absolutely. And, one of the things, we're starting to see, and I'm getting messages on Facebook from old friends, and I know, just from family and relatives who live in other areas and associates, it's stressful, and certainly, people are they've been out of work. There's they're dealing with all kinds of issues, and Marty, what you just said, being surrounded by family, and trying to cope with what's going on in our daily lives and keep productive is most important. I think a lot of people, are watching the news like my wife watches the darn news, at least half every hour, and I think it creates the stress of what's going on, and certainly in your world, and we have a great show, and we have a lot of topics that we're going to cover, but in the world of law. And we need our experts on air. We need them providing information, to their clients, to the listeners, to give comfort, to let people know that in the legal profession, almost everything, is moving forward. And of course, it's not business as usual, but a lot of good things happening. Jeff, if you would tell everybody, and I know, our listeners, we may have some new listeners. Tell everybody about your firm.
So I handle all workers' compensation claims in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, from soup to nuts. It's really the only thing I do, and it's my niche. I've been doing it for 30 years. I have a very nice, powerful team and good resources. There's 4 lawyers that handle these claims in our firm, and a lot of support staff who are absolutely phenomenal. Can't say enough about them. But I handle workers' compensation claims, people who have been injured at work as a result of a work-related injury or an occupational disease for the past 30 years.
Martin, if you would, tell our listeners, and Marty has, by the way, a show once a month on our network, which he does a phenomenal job, and also his debut was last month. So if you would, Martin, tell everybody, tell our listeners a little bit about the firm.
So my firm has been in existence in Philadelphia and South Jersey for literally over 50 years. We're the most recent, version of it, so to speak. we've always represented injured people. My practice somewhat complements Jeff's in that while Jeff, represents injured employees in claims really arising against the employer in that context, I represent people not in claims against their employer, but people who've been injured by third parties, whether it's as basic as an automobile accident or a fall, or more complicated, such as a defective medical device or medication, or in the case of some of the class actions we're involved in with the NFL retired players, and also sex abuse victims in today's world. And like Jeff, I'm proud of the group that I'm with. I have wonderful partners, wonderful associates, and phenomenal paralegals and staff. And this is really an interesting test of that. And we'll get into this more. Jeff and I discussed this over the weekend. We both are pretty well versed at working remotely, but having an entire practice remotely is certainly a change for both of us. So maybe that's a good segue for us.
Yeah, no question.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we've there's a lot of different situations on daily operations happening. So let's just begin. I mean, the quarantine, the coronavirus, both of you, how is it affecting both of your practices on a day-to-day basis, Jeff?
Well, first of all, I want to just say that I've been getting a lot of phone calls from existing clients worried about their money, worried that their checks are going to continue, worried that these companies, these carriers, these insurance companies are going to go out of business or declare bankruptcy, and then they're not going to get any money, and they're all stressed out, all of them. And, what people need to understand with workers' compensation, number one, is that once you're established on benefits, there is no ability for the insurance carrier to stop making payments. There has to be a judge's order for that to stop. And if you're collecting workers' compensation ongoing at the current time, have no fear, your benefits should continue ongoing. And if they're not, that's when I need to hear from you, because if they're not being paid, then there are tools that I have to get them to start up again. One of the things that is a question is bankruptcy. If an insurance company goes bankrupt, the Pennsylvania Guarantee Fund is set up to make sure that your benefits will continue. It's called the Unsecured Guarantee Fund, and this is an insurance company or a reinsurance company. The changes from time to time by the state, but it's always in place and it's always going to be there, and it will always make sure that in the event an insurance company or an employer goes bankrupt, that there is coverage in place for the claimant. There's also something called the Uninsured Employer Guarantee Fund, which is when the employer does not have insurance coverage and then goes belly up or is not able to cover the workers' compensation claim. That under Uninsured Employer Guarantee Fund will come in and give some relief to the claimant. So having said all that, the first thing that I've been doing is trying to calm my clients down. And that's really key, because if you look at this time period, as you alluded to earlier, Joe, this is a time where if you can remove the stress from your day about worrying about the coronavirus, and essentially eliminating the stress of ongoing litigation and what's going to happen and where the world is and whether you're going to get sick and die, that's a lot of stress. If you can get rid of or reduce that stress, this is actually maybe a blessing in disguise for some people, because they get to reunite with their family and spend more time with their family and their loved ones. And frankly, that's not to minimize the disease, of course, but that is something that when you look back at this in years to come, you will say, wow, it was a unique opportunity that I got to reunite with my family again, that I got to spend time with my wife and my kids. It's an unbelievable opportunity if you look at it that way. Now, having said that, our practice has not changed all that much, because we are all over the place in our practice. The core of our practice and in the office is always manned by someone when this virus hasn't happened. So there's always people in the office, obviously. But when the office is shut down, we have enabled our practice to continue to operate fully and without any issues remotely. And the way that we're doing that is we're all connected by computer. We have emails. We're able to communicate with each other, both on the phone, by text, by email, and we're having meetings with each other through conference calls and Zoom. And we're able to conduct our business through the courts, because even though the courts are closed, we're able to still operate within the courts by telephonic hearings. We're able to conduct depositions telephonically of medical experts and the clients. We're able to conduct settlement conferences or mediations telephonically or by Zoom, and now by Skype as well. So we're fully operational and have not had any hiccups in our practice as a result of this virus problem.
Marty, tell us about how your day-to-day operations have changed and how you guys have been dealing with the virus situation.
Well, similar to Jeff, we've been equipped to work in a remote setting for many years. One of the things I want to point out right off the bat that's very important for the listeners. First, people who are represented by lawyers like me or my law firm in litigation, even though the courts right now are closed for face-to-face contact, the cases are still ongoing. And certain deadlines in the case have been delayed by the courts, but very important, people who are listening right now who have not yet retained a lawyer for some type of an injury type situation, the statute of limitations, the time deadline within which a civil action needs to be filed in order to preserve your rights, those deadlines are not being delayed. So please don't, believe that simply because we are all quarantined and the courts are closed, that there's going to be an extension to that. That's very important, because if you have a very, meritorious case where you've been injured due to the fault or wrongdoing of somebody else, don't sit on your rights. Please either, contact an attorney for that purpose. So that I wanted to get that out right off the bat, because there's been some confusion about that I've been reading about. As far as working remotely, very similar to Jeff, I'm not going to repeat everything that he said. We've operated remotely for over a decade. Just as an example, too, I want to share. So first, we have a fabulous paralegal who had moved to Kentucky about 8 years ago with her spouse and raising a family. And she's a phenomenal talent at our office, and we wanted her to continue with us. So she worked remotely for us, being able to log into our system and deal with clients and interact with us for 6 years. In addition, we've had among others, a very, very, very talented nurse paralegal who, because of her life and other responsibilities, she had needed that flexibility from us to enable her to work like that. So we're very familiar with it. The key thing from my perspective, if the people who work with you are conscientious, high character people, they're conscientious whether they're working in the office sitting right next to you or they're in their home working. That's the kind of character that people are made of. As far as the specifics, while we can't have jury trials right now, obviously, similar to Jeff, we had a hearing in New Jersey last week on a significant case involving several law firms where the judge had us do it by Zoom. As far as depositions, whether it's Zoom or Skype or FaceTime, we've been doing that for years, and that's certainly taking place today. Pretty much everything in representation of people who've been injured, whether their cases are in suit or not in suit, is ongoing. The only thing that is being really, of course, delayed right now is we can't be together physically, and we don't have a substitute for jury trials. There's no Zoom way to do that right now, so they're going to be postponed. But everything that needs to be filed in cases, the federal court system in Pennsylvania and New Jersey have been enabled for online filing for quite some time. So that was the standard of care way before coronavirus. And then just as one example of our world, we represent several hundred retired NFL players in the NFL concussion settlement. And under that settlement, the injuries involved cognitive, mental effect on your brain. And in order to best guide our clients, we had to screen them in a testing fashion, neuropsychological tests, basically to assess their brain function, their memory function, their judgment functions. And these players are all over the country. Totally impractical to be flying players, too expensive, too time consuming. So what we did, we conducted all that testing through the use of either Skype or FaceTime from our offices. It was very convenient for the players who needed to have somebody with them as another person to kind of verify their conditions. We needed the face-to-face contact. And this is something Jeff and I talked about over the weekend. Nothing beats having your client across from you face-to-face. But we don't have that opportunity right now. And the fact that we don't doesn't mean that we can't still protect you.
It's interesting. And technology, we've heard many attorneys say, and it's evident more than ever in this conversation, it almost seems like technology in the legal field has been preparing for a situation like this. And therefore, in many cases, obviously, what you're talking, the big one is jury trials that are not able to be done, obviously, through Skype or anything like that. However, for the most part, with depositions and different areas where you need, like you said, you need to look at your client. Technology has prepared the legal field for just this type of situation. Obviously, not with this situation in mind. You agree with that, Marty?
Absolutely. It's a natural evolution. And I should just mention one thing. Right now, jury trials are tried with the jurors in the same room as the judge and the attorneys. However, over the past several years, we've been involved in certain cases where there may be an expert witness who is in a different state or a different country who testifies via satellite into the courtroom. So this has already been in a progression. We're much better actually equipped for what is happening in the practice of law right now than we would have had this happened more than 10 years ago.
Jeff, when you're in front of the judge in the workers' comp arena, do you typically have your client at the hearing with you?
Well, it's interesting. In workers' compensation in Pennsylvania, we have what you call serial hearings. There's a series of hearings, usually 3 of them in any particular petition. One hearing is used for the claimant's testimony. One hearing is used for the admissibility of both the claimant and the defense medical expert depositions, which is the medical evidence, and another hearing would be for either updated testimony or fact witness testimony if they're not already taken by deposition. The judges have already been gravitating towards not having the claimant testify in the beginning on a claim petition, but rather having the claimant testify by deposition, and if the case does not settle, bringing it back for claimant testimony at the final hearing on these series of hearings so that the judge can assess credibility. You have to understand that both in Marty's world and in my world, 9.5, I would say, maybe 9 to 9.5 out of 10 cases result in a settlement. And that means no jury trial. That means no decision from a judge on the merits of the case on a workers' comp claim, but instead a resolution by settlement. And in our world, in the workers' compensation world, that is handled by means of something called a compromise and release agreement. An agreement that sets forth the 4 corners of the settlement, all the contingencies, all the issues, so that if there's ever a problem going forward, they can look to the agreement for guidance in terms of the settlement terms. In our case, in the workers' compensation claims, the way that settlements have to happen is that they must be approved by a judge, and that requires, usually, the claimant will appear at the hearing, review the document with me, sign all the documentation. We would go in front of the judge. The judge would listen to my questioning of the claimant and then would assess whether the claimant understands the nature and terms of the agreement, and then will ultimately approve the agreement if the judge thinks that the claimant understands everything. In this, what's been happening is that there are a lot of people that, like Marty said, are from out of state. So like an expert might appear out of state or out of the country even, so too are some claimants. They're out of the state or out of the country or on the other end of the state, and they just can't make it to the hearing, or they're not able to get to the hearing for one reason or another. And in those cases, what happens is we do all these approvals by telephone. So everything is signed in advance. We go over the testimony of the claimant and the terms of the agreement in advance, and then it gets approved. What we're able to do now, and what has been coming for a long time, is something called DocuSign. And there are many other programs like it, but DocuSign is a typical program that allows a signature remotely by a claimant on the computer, so nothing needs to be printed, and that automatically returns back to the sender, and that can be circulated for all the parties' signatures and then uploaded into the system so the judge can review the agreement in advance and then just listen to the testimony over the phone from the claimant. And it's a godsend, because in this day and age, with all of this all these stay-at-home orders in effect, there's no possible way that the claimant is going to be making it to a hearing live, and the courts are closed for that purpose anyway. So the way around this, and this has been done since this has happened with much success, is that everything is done by DocuSign, email, and by telephone. And so I am happy to say that the governor has deputized the Bureau of Workers' Compensation director to waive certain requirements in order to get these settlements approved, such as a notary, which would be otherwise required when the claimant is not available and two witnesses can't witness the document for the settlement agreement. Then they usually will have an affidavit signed by a notary that this is the claimant, and so forth and so on. That's been waived for this purpose. So in sum, the settlements have been able to go through, and I would imagine in Marty's world, the settlements and the releases, the general releases that are able to be signed can be done remotely as well. Is that right, Marty?
I was listening and just, yeah, exactly. And in fact, in our world, we don't need every settlement approved. Settlements involving a decedent or a minor or somebody who's mentally incapacitated, those require court approval. But in the typical setting, we represent someone, we reach a settlement, and it's just a release that is frequently signed in the presence of a notary. I'm happy to say that many of the insurance companies who are on the other side have relaxed the need for the notary and are accepting the releases without them. So also a good sign. The other thing I just wanted to add, my experience, in addition to what Jeff described, which is pretty much identical, many people really operate not exclusively, but close to exclusively on their cell phones. They don't use computers. They don't, and many people don't have a printer, or if they have a printer, they haven't filled it with paper in a while. So a program like DocuSign enables us and Jeff's firm to send, whether it's a fee agreement, a medical authorization, or a settlement release to someone, and they can access it through their phone, electronically sign it, and send it back. It's very convenient. It's not like it's an ad for DocuSign, but truthfully, it's a fantastic program. It is so easy, and our clients love it.
You know, Marty, when you're doing a deposition, especially in your field, you know, a lot of times it's face to face. Is there any advantage either way? I would suspect it would be to the plaintiff of doing a deposition not in person and more, you know, on a Skype situation.
Nothing beats being there. Okay, Nothing beats being there face-to-face with somebody, whether you're the plaintiff attorney or whether you're the defense attorney, whether it's in a workers' comp situation or a third-party situation like mine. So ideally, and the norm is you do depositions face-to-face. It's easier to assess somebody's credibility. I think it's easier to get more in-depth answers. There's no question that is the preferred way. And in fact, certain attorneys right now refuse to take depositions, even during the coronavirus, by electronically. So the courts, my opinion, about that. What's that?
How do the insurance companies feel about it? Typically, they like to have it. They like to question somebody face to face. Do they have? Are you running into situations where any insurance companies have postponed the deposition until after things are back to at least a little bit of normalcy, or are they pretty much gone status quo and doing everything over the computer?
I can share it this way. This has been our experience. Certain cases that we handle represent catastrophically injured people, and certain cases involve people who have not been that severely injured or impaired. The issue of whether depositions will go forward has really been a case by case with the other attorney. Now, the other attorney may need authorization from his or her insurer to do the depositions electronically, whether it's through Zoom or Skype or some other video type format. But I would say, truthfully, in my experience so far, and I've done this before coronavirus, certain situations where it's just more conducive to get the deposition done via video, and you get it done, it's finished. Often with depositions, they get postponed because of different types of convenience issues or scheduling problems. So there are lawyers who I would say are more of the quote old school who insist upon face-to-face for everything. I don't think that's practical going forward, and our experience during the coronavirus has been that most of the firms we're dealing with, where we've tried to schedule depositions or settlement conferences, that has not been in any way impaired by the fact we're doing it electronically through Zoom or the like.
What about settlements in regards to the insurance companies? Are you, or either, and I know Jeff, we may have touched base on this, but what Marty, what is your experience? Are the insurance companies? I know both of you like to be updated on what your clients are going through. So and in typical situations, obviously, whether an injured worker or somebody who's been injured in a third party situation, it's a very difficult, stressful, emotional time for them. In many cases, the only comfort that brings them that they have is maybe they have a spouse who's also working, so they're not destitute. But in today's world, at least right now, you could be running into situations where the spouse is obviously they may have shut their business down for a period of time during this situation, which stresses situations even more. How important is it for the two of you to stay in tune to what's going on in your clients' lives, number one, and number two, as related to a settlement? And in other words, they may have been able to hold out before, but they may be in dire need now. And then finally, on that issue, are you noticing anything with insurance companies that are, that understand it? They may be, they may have, stressed clients that are willing to take a lower offer right now. Tell me a little bit about the perspective towards settlements. I'll go with Martin first, and then we'll go segue to Jeff.
Again, kind of a case-by-case basis. I was pleasantly surprised that right off the bat, once we were in the quarantine situation, that I had several cases that settled right away. Now, in my world, again, even though, as Jeff correctly pointed out, over 90% of the cases usually settle, but the looming trial date is always a good leverage for everybody. It's a deadline, and it forces everybody to know that they have to get serious. There are certain carriers in certain cases where it's clear to me that they're kind of leveraging that delay, and they want to see how that's going to affect my client's position and our position. And by the way, even though we're dealing with the quarantine and the crisis right now, many of our clients have been very, very catastrophically injured. They've been unable to work. So I've been dealing with this way before the coronavirus. Our system that does provide us, particularly in Philadelphia, where there's a schedule, the day you file your lawsuit, you're on a schedule towards a trial. We have a phenomenal bar in the city of Philadelphia, defense side as well as the plaintiff side. We work together to get cases done. For the most part, right now, I'm seeing cooperation. However, there are clearly certain cases, certain insurance carriers who are, in my opinion, trying to take advantage of the situation to benefit their position.
Yeah, no, that's a big, that's exactly what I'm talking about. They understand. Jeff, what are you experiencing?
Very similar, very, very similar. In fact, people think generally that they're not going to pay me anything, but if the attorney files a lawsuit or the attorney files a claim petition for workers' comp, the workers' compensation carrier will get scared and will pick up the claim or will settle my case. That's not how it works. You actually have to do something. You can't just file a lawsuit, and you can't just make a workers' compensation claim. You have to do the work. And so a lot of attorneys who aren't able to work remotely or who are disagreeing with taking depositions by Zoom or Skype or even telephone and say, well, we're going to just delay this until after this ban gets lifted, this stay-at-home order gets lifted. That's the wrong way to proceed, because that will unduly delay every claim. So the answer is that you must push forward. And in fact, even if there's no coronavirus problem, in the past, if you don't put on your evidence, you don't advance the ball and you don't score the touchdown. Just because two teams are on a football field doesn't mean they're in good shape. You have to advance the ball and score a touchdown. And so in order to make cases in the right posture for settlement, you have to take action. Remember that the defense on both sides, meaning the defense for workers' comp, the defense for third-party claims that Marty's handling, they get paid by billing. They bill by the hour. They get paid by the hour. And if they don't do any work, they're not going to do anything to try to. There's no pressure on them to settle the cases. And so, in order to place pressure on them, you have to schedule the depositions. You have to take the depositions. You have to put your client's testimony on. You have to do all these things in order to push it forward. And that's what we're doing, and that's what Marty's doing. And there is no real hamper to the operation from this virus. We are going around the paradigm. That's something that everyone needs to hear and everyone needs to do, not just for lawyers, but for people in society generally. This is a paradigm shift, meaning it's not business as usual the way it has been forever. Things are different. You're not going to the grocery stores sometimes because of the possible infection. You're having the grocery stores delivered to you. You're placing grocery store orders by email or by website. You're not calling in orders. Sometimes you are, but most of the time, instead of picking up stuff and going shopping, you're doing it online now. That's the paradigm shift. And if businesses can't shift with the paradigm and become attractive to the consumer by shifting with the paradigm, then their business will fail. And there are going to be situations where that happens, and it's going to happen inevitably because certain businesses are not equipped to handle this kind of a paradigm shift. The good news is that our firms are. Marty's firm and my firm have already been acclimated to this problem and have already been acclimated to this paradigm shift well before the coronavirus even set foot in the United States. And so this is certainly hampers our cases in terms of now we have to do a go around. And yes, the best thing is when we can see each other face to face, because we can assess credibility that way. We can cross-examine adverse witnesses that way in a much better fashion. But just because that's not available doesn't mean the job can't get done, and doesn't mean the job can't get done effectively. It's just a matter of shifting with this paradigm. Marty, do you agree with me on that?
Absolutely. And I'm just speaking with you over the weekend about this as well. It didn't seem to me, and it still doesn't sound to me, your clients as well as our clients were really moving very smoothly. This has not been a problem where it has not been an obstacle for us. And we've had to deal with these workarounds before coronavirus. We've had situations where we just can't be face-to-face with people. I mean, on a personal, in the drug and the medical device cases we handle, these are people from all over the country. We've been representing them for 15 years. It's very typical that we would have to establish a nice, responsible way to communicate by telephone, primarily, and email and video when needed. So no, I absolutely agree with you. And fortunately for you and I, as businesses, our businesses are conducive to operating in this fashion. Not every business, people who are in construction, people who are in retail, people who are in restaurants, it's not their fault. It's just that they're not conducive to this with the distancing that's needed.
A little shout out to our listeners. You're listening to the Jeff Gross Show on WWDB-TN, the Who's Who in Philly Labor Network, sponsored by Weinman Pain and Wellness, Serious Doctors for Serious Injuries. Jeff's Gross. Jeff's guest is Marty Rubenstein. Gentlemen, I'm going to bring into the conversation Mark Levithan, who is the practice manager of our sponsor, Weinman Pain and Wellness. Mark, how are you today?
I'm great, Joe. How's yourself?
Well, I'm doing good. We had a great conversation talking about, in many ways, the show is must go on when and how in the legal field and as related, especially in our area when we're dealing with a lot of injury, we've adapted and we've prepared in years to come in regards to being able to service clients, although it's not day to day. It's not business as usual, like Jeff Gross just mentioned. We're adjusting to the situation. Tell us a little bit about how you guys have adjusted and the fact that, you're treating your injured workers and your injury victims on a daily basis.
Well, first of all, let me say hi to Marty and hi to Jeff. How are you guys today?
Great. Hey, Mark, how are you?
Good. And Art, I was listening to Marty and I was listening to Jeff, and they are two very, very, very competent attorneys that do great jobs, for their clients, and they've been able to adapt and do everything as they've said. With our business, it's a little bit different than being an attorney. Since we treat patients, you physically can't treat a patient if they're going through physical therapy or they need to be physically examined over the phone. Now, we're doing a lot of telemedicine, over the telephone as much as we possibly can, but we still have people that are in pain, still have people that are very injured that are coming in, and they physically need to see somebody. They need to have treatments. They need to have modalities so that they don't go backwards in their treatment. So we're doing that, and we've set up the office in a very unique way, as Jeff said, a new paradigm, where we've adapted to this. Luckily, we were very computerized, and we were able to do everything through a telemedicine side. But we set the office up for the people that are still coming in. And yes, the traffic is much slower because people are afraid to come in. But we are staffed. We have everything, very clean. Everything's Clorox down after every patient. We have the office set up where people can't sit in the waiting room. They have to be 6 feet apart. We have our bathrooms segregated where they can't go in together. So we're doing everything humanly possible to keep it safe, and not only keep it safe, but to keep the continuity and the flow of our patients getting treatment on a regular basis. I'd also like to comment on something that we've been able to do as well. I know you guys were talking about depositions. Well, we had a very unique situation last week. We had a deposition. It was done strictly by telephone, and it went extremely well. We had apparently it was a different law firm than your guys, but what happened was the attorney was terrific. He deposed Dr. Weinerman, and they were able to reverse the decision for the client, which worked out terrific for the client. So we are still able to function on a daily basis and do what we need to do at Weinerman Pain and Wellness.
Let me say something. It's Jeff.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Let me just say one thing, Mark. That's phenomenal, and I'm really, really glad to hear that. One of the things, Joe, I want to point out to our listeners is that I told you that businesses have to shift with this paradigm. They have to adapt to changes in the world, and this is a huge change. And so I will tell you that Dr. Weinerman has undoubtedly been able to shift with the paradigm. He is able to do telemedicine. He's able to he was deposed, as you heard last week, by deposition. So, I mean, I give a big shout out to Dr. Weinerman because of his ability to adapt and shift with the paradigm. So that's really good to hear.
And you know, it's amazing. And Marty, you had mentioned, and we talked about it, and it's in your notes, about how Mark mentioned telemedicine, and talking about a little bit how the practice of law is in many ways sort of similar these days. Could you elaborate on that, Marty?
Well, two things. One, I want to just echo what Jeff had said, and Mark, with Dr. Weinerman's practice. You were equipped for this because you had already introduced state-of-the-art technology into your office before this happened. Made it easier for the doctors to coordinate together and communicate. I saw the way it was set up there when Austin took me on the recent tour. So that's what most businesses really need to be. Anybody who's serving people, you need to allow technology to help you. Now, as it relates to telemedicine, what Jeff and I have been discussing for the past half hour, you can call it telelegal. I mean, we've been doing it. One thing that is different between what Jeff and I do and then, of course, what Dr. Weinerman does is there are situations when the technology today does not enable Dr. Weinerman to get a test result without physically having the patient in his office. There's certain things that just, even today, cannot be duplicated electronically. And in certain situations, physicians still must, see patients face to face. But in our world, I'll say the telelegal world, as we've described for the past 30, 40 minutes, I really don't think our practices are skipping a beat for our clients. Our clients are protected. I think the only real thing is that because in my world, jury trials will be delayed, there's a little bit of the fear of justice, delayed being justice denied. But that's going to be temporary. We will be, there's no question that as this thing improves, we will be back on that. But I think we're fortunate that we can help our clients in this fashion.
It's interesting, and I'm going to kind of segue into some of our discussion points. Before I do that, though, I want to ask Jeff Gross in regards to individuals. This is important when you're dealing with essential workplaces. Anybody that contracts the coronavirus while they're at work, even though it's a disease and can't be seen, you actually. I imagine it'll be obviously almost impossible to prove, but the fact of the matter is, if you're a doctor or a nurse, if you're in a medical practice, or you're a first responder, a police officer, even a retail clerk, and you contract the virus while you're at work, are you eligible for workers' comp?
I'm glad you asked that, Joe. Let me just say something, first of all. It is nearly impossible to prove where you got the virus from, okay? Unless you're quarantined on a ship like you in the beginning phases of this problem, There was that cruise ship that everyone got sick on, and there were 22 crew members that got sick, and some of whom died. There's no question that that's where they got that from. All right, that you could prove. But in the mainstream situation of you going to work and getting coronavirus, you don't know where you got it from. It's not definitive. The good news is that there has been bipartisan, meaning both Republican and Democrat alike, there has been bipartisan push to put together a bill, at least in Pennsylvania, that allows for first responders, nurses, doctors, ambulance drivers, paramedics, and the like, to be able to have a legislation that says that first responders will have a rebuttable presumption of causation to the work environment of the coronavirus disease should they get it. In other words, if you are a nurse or a doctor or an ambulance driver or a paramedic or even somebody who draws blood for a living, and you develop the coronavirus, it will be presumed to have been gotten at work or contracted at work. It's a rebuttable presumption. It takes our burden of proof and lessens it considerably, such that we don't actually have to prove causation. We don't need an epidemiologist to come in and testify about the chain of events that occurred that led to the development of the coronavirus disease. They can simply take that for granted, as that is exactly what happened, and that's going to be in first responders. They are working on that legislation as we speak. There will probably be a term on it of approximately 1 year, such that in the event that the legislation passes, in 5 years from now, should you get coronavirus and die, this will long be gone. So it'll be very difficult to show causation. But for the time being, they will have this in place. And what we're trying to do now is to expand that not only for first responders, but for the good men and women of our country, especially in our state of Pennsylvania, because this is a state law, that where you are an essential worker. So we're trying to have it not limited to first responders as has bipartisan approval right now, but instead they want to develop it for people who are essential workers. So that includes, the truckers, the grocery store clerks, the people that are putting together the groceries, the baggers, the shippers, all those food deliveries that you've been getting, all that industry down the road, during that line that is deemed to be an essential worker, they will be we can expand it to include them. They will also be included in this lessened burden of proof as well, and where there will be a rebuttable presumption. And just real quickly on the term rebuttable presumption, there is a presumption that the causation of the coronavirus is due to the work environment. If you fit into this category, it's rebuttable to the extent that if there's evidence that you got it at your sister's while you were visiting there and not at work, and there's hardcore evidence of that, then that could be a defense. That kind of a defense exists. Does that make sense?
And Marty,
everybody?
Marty, a quick question to you in regards to, and nobody wants to talk lawsuits, but they're going to come. There's so many people working in areas where there's maybe no equipment, but there's also equipment that may be defective. You talked about potential product liability claims, even medication liability issues. What do you potentially foresee in those areas, Marty?
So a couple of things. So first, for there to be a medication or a medical device that is approved for use in our country, it has to be approved by the Food and Drug Administration. That's our system. And there's a very extensive process where manufacturers or the pharmaceutical companies, largely or the medical device companies, will test whatever it is that they're going to try to promote for use to help people for safety. There's testing, animal testing in certain situations, people testing, and then once all the data is accumulated, the Food and Drug Administration then either approves that drug or device, and if they do approve it, they approve it when it can be used, what it's safe and effective for, how it can be used, and when it can be used. That's particularly relevant here because right now, what we're seeing is there's two parts. With regard to, I'll come back to ventilators in a second. I was glad you asked that question, Joe, because of what we're all seeing right now, and this is, I think, very, very important with hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine. Now, these are medications that are very similar that have been approved for use with malaria. Now, it's a perfect example. The FDA has approved what they are used for, but right now we are in a worldwide emergency and certainly a national emergency. So while normally there would be an extensive time-consuming process to get a medication approved for a different use, there is a legal basis called the emergency use authorization. It's been used in the past, and it's been used here as recently as within the last 72 hours, so that the FDA has approved the use of this drug in certain situations. The concern here is that for people who are in the more advanced stage, pneumonia, pulmonary, those patients are in the close to desperate. Emergency maneuvers are certainly justified to protect them. However, the FDA has not approved these drugs to be used routinely in every situation where a patient believes he or she or has had a test indicating that they have COVID. And where some of the potential liability could exist here is with indiscriminate use of a drug that, according to, let's face it, we all listen to Dr. Fauci and have tremendous respect for him and for Dr. Burke. Both of them, who are incredible professionals, have basically put the caution flag out there for us. Don't use it for everything. And but we have a country that we're all desperate for answers. We want to see a vaccination. We want to see a therapy. So this is a very delicate balance. Ultimately, it could result in some liability if it's not used properly. Second, with regard to ventilators, two parts. One, as it relates to what I was just speaking about, we are importing ventilators from countries where they're manufactured pursuant to different standards than we utilize. So similarly, there's been an emergency use authorization to enable us to bring them in and use them in our hospitals. But, this is something I shared with Jeff over the weekend, I recently finished a case. It was a confidential settlement involving a 44-year-old gentleman who was hospitalized. He was in the intensive care unit at a particular hospital. And while he was in the intensive care unit, the battery in the ventilator failed. And the way ventilators operate is when they're not functioning, there's an audible, loud alarm, like there's a fire in the building, that will go off to alert people that it's not functioning so that they can come in and render manual assistance. So my hope is that the ventilators that are being brought in are of safe, effective, functioning, no malfunctions, and that we don't have those concerns. But unfortunately, that is an area where there has been liability in the past. In my situation, the 44-year-old man did pass away. So I am, right now, let's face it, our medical people, nurses, other staff, doctors, everybody, this is our front line. They're heroes. So the last thing we want to think about is, liability against them or arising from their conduct. It's just really unthinkable right now. But
no doubt about it. No doubt about it. And certainly, we're not advocating that, but what we are doing is pointing out, and also for employers, we're educating people because it's still, and obviously it's, people are, like you said, the FDA and the government have made exceptions in specific areas, and that's important. And people are overrun. Mark Levinson, real quick, do you see any long-term, changes from this, from the pandemic, sticking around? In other words, changes for the law, like maybe a telemedicine in your practice?
Yeah, I think not only for our practice, but I had an interesting conversation with another attorney the other day where as attorneys can do depositions and we can do telemedicine, that people may not need as much actual space in their offices where people can work out of their homes, okay? An attorney can go around and do depositions, go to court, and basically work from his house. So one of the things may change is the actual square footage of space that people utilize at this point. Realizing
do you anticipate Dr. Weineman potentially doing as many remote depositions potentially as he does in person?
Well, I guess as the gentleman we're talking about before, I guess in a deposition it's better probably to be face to face so that an attorney can see, people's expressions and how they're handling it, so that they can do what they do as an attorney. But yeah, I think the virtual depositions can work. Probably not as well as a face to face, but yes, they could work depending on people's time frames.
Gentlemen, time flies when you're having fun. I'd like each one of you to tell our listeners how they can contact you and the firm if they are seeking your services. I'll start with Marty.
Thanks. I just want to say first, thanks, Joe, and thanks, Jeff, and thanks, Mark, for allowing me to be a participant. You guys are professionals, and I really enjoy being a part of this when I get the opportunity to work with people who I respect like this. So thank you very much.
It's our pleasure.
So my firm, we are reachable at 215-735-1616 or 888-601-1616 or www.levybaldante, LEVYBALDANTE.com. And stay safe, everyone.
Jeff Gross?
Thank you, Joe, and thanks, Marty and Mark, for appearing at today's show. You guys are excellent as usual. You can reach me. Anybody can reach me directly on my cell phone. I'm one of those idiots that give out my cell number. 215-512-1500. 215-512-1500. It's an easy number to remember. That actually goes directly to me. I like to talk to my clients and my prospective clients so that I can know each one of them. That's one of the things I like to do with my practice. So you can reach me there anytime. My website is www.philaworkerscomp.com. That's PHILA workerscomp.com.
Mark Levinson, the contact information for you at the practice?
Sure. We're located at 110 Center. That's right above Suburban Station, 1617 JFK Boulevard, Suite 1100. If you'd like to call and make an appointment, just call the office, 215-988-9503. We'll be more than happy to help you with whatever concerns you have.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for joining us on the Jeff Gross Show. Like I said before, time flies when you're having fun. We did not even touch a break today. I want to thank, obviously, Jeff for being our host, Martin Rubenstein for being a great guest, and, of course, our sponsor, Mark Levinson, with Weineman, Payne & Wallace. I want to thank our listeners for tuning in to the Jeff Gross Show on Talk Radio, WWDB, 860 AM. And thank you so much for listening to the Who's Who in Philly Labor Network. We're sponsored by Weineman, Payne & Wallace. Doctors for Serious Injuries. For Jeff Gross, I'm your co-host, Joe Doherty.